We'll get into a topic that is really just nonstop. We brought it up a little bit yesterday, but a little bit heavier into what Dennis Dodd had last night reporting about UConn, the Big 12, a possible vote, etc. But also today, Chris Vanini from theathletic.com, RJ Maryland, wide receiver SMU. Craig's off the radar, Paul's top five, Hall of Famer John McClain today, and also Ricky Thompson, Baylor sideline analyst and former player, will join us. We'll also break down a few of the first week games, including Baylor, TCU, Oklahoma State, Texas Tech, as a discussion for today. Now, we can ride it, hide it, and run from it, but the UConn story is out there. Dennis Dodd last night with CBS Sports with the story, basically that 6 schools lean in favor of the move, at least as of now. 2 of them are against it, and then there are, 8 that are not so sure. Fox apparently doesn't want to have anything to do with this. Guys, this is a story. I thought about this more and more. I'm going to read a note from an alum who had his take, who's a part of a UConn collective. Craig, you mentioned yesterday bad timing. I just wish this would go away, but I know it's not.
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to go away. I don't know who put this back out there as far as the timing itself goes, whether that was a UConn move or a Brett Yormark move or whose move it was. I have no idea, but, yeah, I don't like the timing of it. I think I made that very clear yesterday. You had an entire offseason and, days before the opening week of the year, actually, few days before, the week 0, it got going, and now here it's very much on the front and center for Big 12 folks, at least. I don't know how much people nationally care, but obviously Big 12 country realignment's been an ongoing topic, and here we are. I don't love the move. I don't think it adds much in terms of football. I know that football is not necessarily the big picture that Brett Yormark has in mind with this move. I understand there's the caveat of, the other sports would join in a couple of years, and then football would basically have to prove itself, if you will. At least that's what I had read and in some of those articles. And, sounds good, I guess, but it does nothing for me, guys. It really does. It does absolutely nothing for me. And I understand the whole basketball side of it. I think, obviously both men's and women's would benefit from that. But you are talking about 1 game a year for your favorite school probably. And I'd be interested in some, but it's not going to change my viewing habits that they're suddenly in the league,
Our opinions are known. I don't think any of us are on board with it. If it happens, it happens. We cover it, if it, whatever.
Yeah.
Here is Bob Thompson. Let's skip over to this one, Garrett. We haven't heard from Bob in a while, but Bob keeps up with a lot of the television information. He said, given we don't know the value of the Big 12 deal, starting in 21 and 23, we'll use current deal numbers. UConn is slated to get about $7.2 million on average each year with the new Fox NBC TNT deal. UConn doesn't leave for the same money, so let's just say, okay, it's a $10 to $11 million move. That represents roughly 35% of the current Big 12 media deal, much higher allocation than is normally allocated. Question then becomes, is UConn football worth $20.7 million?
No.
I would say no. I don't know the exact numbers, but that doesn't sound like they would be worth that overall. So no, I would say no on UConn football being worth that much. Yeah.
Here's Mark D'Amelio. He is, by the way, a UConn alum, founder of the D'Amelio Huskies NIL Collective.
An influencer family, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I do not want UConn to leave the Big East. I'm not going to read this whole thing, and I got it written here in front of me. I would prefer us stay independent, but we don't have the financial resources from TV contracts, donors, or the state of Connecticut. I don't believe UConn taxpayers want to fund UConn football. Last time we stayed complacent, we got shut out of the ACC, stuck in the AAC. We need to control our own destiny, and it seems like the Big 12 is the right and only opportunity we have if you believe the future of college athletics. We don't know. Everything's going to shake out, but we need to put a stadium on campus. And he got blasted. A lot of people, I saw some of the direct messages, et cetera, to him. They were like, F off. They did not like what he was saying. But they're torn. You can tell that most everyone attached to UConn is torn on what they want to.
They want what they kind of have, but they want more money for it. I think ideally they'd stay in a basketball-driven conference. Now, granted, the Big 12 is a basketball-driven conference, but, I think that if you had your ways, you'd stay right where you are and somehow magically get several $1 million more per year. But that's not realistic. So it's very clear that the people entertaining this idea or pursuing it, it's all like anything else in college football. What does it come back to? It comes back to money, and that's all there is to it. UConn needs to make more money to stay at or join a certain level where they feel like they belong. And that's not all of the fan base, mind you. There's plenty that are against this move entirely, even if they don't end up, being able to close any gaps or stay at a certain level outside of basketball. Basketball, they'll be fine. But I understand the pursuit of the money part of this. That's what every other school's been doing this entire offseason, right? That's what Texas and Oklahoma moved to the SEC in part for. That's what the Pac schools moved in part for, to both the Big 12 and to the Big 10. So it's not like they'd be the only school that's been doing that recently. But I don't like the part where he mentions, like, if we don't do this, it's almost like the Big 12's saving their football program. And I don't like the idea of, like, the charity aspect of this. It's like you get the basketball, and that's great, but you basically have to fund their football program and just hope they turn a corner at some point because they're getting more money.
All right.
I don't know how much I love that idea as, a follower of the conference.
Well, the Huskies have...
I mean, I couldn't agree with what he said more, is that you're basically taking Connecticut basketball and everything else and then funding their football program and hoping it turns out. This does nothing for me.
Okay, do you think they could do enough down the road, which is like 7 years from now, to have a basketball-only contract, which is what Yormark wants, and I think other conferences are starting to understand that UConn basketball is right now, they are it. They are the standard. But enough in that to fuel enough to pay them without anybody else giving in again like they have for the last two increases in the conference?
No, I mean, like, just for the men's and women's basketball, which would certainly increase the basketball value of your conference. But again, we don't really know what what does a basketball dollar increase mean relative to what a football dollar increase would mean. And they don't add football value. In fact, they take away value in almost every metric that you can think of. So they also don't have, from that guy's even own statement, they don't have enthusiastic support. And if this isn't well thought of in UConn circles and in Big 12 circles, then maybe this is just something they need to let go.
This is from Bracket Cat. The timing is so UConn can give a 27-month notice to get out of the Big East in time for 2026. Let's talk about this. Their football team. And listen, there are teams that in the Big 12 that have had some bad droughts. Kansas, Baylor, Kansas State, among others over the years. The Huskies have not had a winning season in football since 2010. They've won 13 games in the last 6 years. Now, we've also learned that if you bring in the right kind of markets and the possibilities when it comes to numbers, it doesn't matter whether you're winning or not, because Rutgers, of course, had their long stretch of being average at best along the way. They would get men's and women's basketball in 2026. Football wouldn't even come along till 2031. And we're talking about it in 2024. Think about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's the part about realignment that can be dizzying and kind of annoying sometimes, is that it's always like down the line. You know what I mean? Like the conversation never stops, because it's always like 2 years from now, 10 years from now, 5 years from now. And so it never ends. And then like we saw last summer, the moment it actually does happen and becomes official, it's on to the next thing. It's on to, like, all right, they just, after an entire pursuit of a year long of 4 Pac-12 schools, the Big 12 got what they wanted. Less than 24 hours later, Oregon State and Washington State, can they join the Big? And it's just like, Jesus Christ. So, like, that's realignment talk for you. It's always, further and further and further, and it never ends. And so, yeah, this is a move that you're talking about 7 years down the line from now, and far as, like, official entry all across the board with that next TV contract and all of that. So, yeah, it's a long play. It's not a near-term play that's going to make a whole lot of difference right away. It's what you're banking on the future looking like.
And UConn fans also, there's a segment of them, I believe, that would like to go, wait a minute, what if the ACC does have their issues in the next year or two? Would we not want to be a part of them, as especially a basketball conference and also location? Dennis Dodd reporting that there will be financial benchmarks that UConn would have to hit before football even joined the league in 2031. This was compared to, in this article I read today. Listen, by the way, UConn basketball, men's and women, we know where they are. We know who they are. We know what Hurley has done in Gino. This is nothing against UConn. It's just being honest about what we think they bring to the table, which we don't have a vote. It's like at 2 o'clock at the bar going home with the only girl who is left. They'll come if they have, whether they have UConn or not. I thought that was a little bit shady.
Well, the thing is I also don't understand why this has to happen now at all.
Well, he just mentioned bracket cat as far as the notifying, but even still, I'm with you though. Like you could have done this earlier than you just did, because like you would have still met that deadline had you done it. I don't know, any time in the last 7 months when there hasn't been any football, but all of a sudden the day before, or like the few days before the opening kickoff, like all of a sudden it's major headlines.
Can we let the Four Corner schools play their first college game?
Well, that's what I just said about, like, they just announced they're joining after all this back and forth, and like 24 hours later, it's like on to the next schools that we could bring in. And at some point, I'm like, are we actually rooting for what's best for the conference, or are we just getting off on the fact that like the Big 12 scooping up schools, and it's a never ending, like, how many can we grab, whether it makes sense or not, And I don't know. I guess that depends on who you are and how you kind of take in the information. So to each their own, from my standpoint. But yeah, it just feels like the realignment wheel never, ever stops, especially when it comes to the Big 12. And that's cool in some ways, but I also think it does take away from, like, can we watch the teams we've been reviewing and previewing and looking forward to? But like, no, now we're on to UConn again. Like, what the... And so that part to me, I don't enjoy, but I get it.
The last time when I spoke with a couple of people at the administrative level among the Big 12 was in the summer when Colorado was saying yes. And then, of course, eventually the Arizona State, and also Utah. And I was told that not infatuation, but the need of UConn to be a part of the Big 12 from the commissioner's office was something that I've said this before, I'll say it again, is something that he would lose that battle. It would be a wart, a hickey. When everything he was doing was not touching the goal, but it was turning the goal, but it was pretty good. And he was willing to try to, like, maybe change that momentum with this. And here we are now. It's been 2 summers, right? No.
Well,
it's been just
officially
over a
little over a summer, yeah.
So based on what we heard from Dennis Dodd then, about that you've got 6 teams that are like, yeah, sure, let's do it.
Yeah, that's interesting. We kind of just ran over that, but that's interesting.
And then 10 teams that are in some variation of I need to know more information or no.
Nothing worse than a maybe.
Yeah, no. Like,
it's interesting that the information is being leaked, though.
Yeah.
Like,
I think this is planned.
Yeah, you're putting out the fact that, like, hey, there's 6 schools on board, and they need, I believe it's 12 for the majority vote. So you're halfway there, I guess. No, wait.
You're halfway. If you need a super majority.
6 schools are in. So, so they need 6 more out of the 10 undecided. And so, that's interesting to know that. And I'm very curious of who those schools are. And I do want to say, for any UConn fan who comes across this video, it's nothing personal against you whatsoever. But, like, if somebody just randomly right before Big East basketball season started said, like, we're gonna add, like, just some team you don't care all that much about, that's just sort of random.
Denver.
Yeah, like Denver, and you're like, what? Oh, I guess so. Okay.
Yeah.
Like, but hey, you're going to make more money. You're going to make like $1 million more a year. You'd be like, but I don't really care about playing Denver in like baseball. Like, so I don't really, and so that's where we're coming from. And I think UConn fans understand that, because there's a good number of them that don't want this move. But again, everybody understands what the move is being initiated by, and that's this need to get on a lifeboat and make more money.
If in fact there's a way that they could prove that Your Mark and Endeavor and whoever else can prove that UConn brings in money, where the original teams that are left in the Big 12 don't have to, like, okay, we'll sacrifice a couple of million this year when it's the 4 schools and then there's the 4 more. If they can show it and convince people, and it's like this is going to happen, then fine. But until they do, I don't care about like all these diagrams or whatever. Somebody mentioned, schools in the Big 12 have had their problems in football. I brought that up. Right. K-State, Kansas, and Baylor have had extended droughts, but they're part of the original conference. It's like Vanderbilt in the SEC or somebody else in another conference. They're a part of the original conference.
And again, I'm going to go back to that. Not everybody is on board with this right away. And if you go back to the other schools they've added, they probably had to have I mean, I'm sure there were some people like, well, I don't know about Cincinnati or BYU. Like, I'm
There's
sure
a lot of people that still don't like the Cincinnati
but, like,
move.
as far among those leaders, like you maybe had to sell a couple more.
Sure, you did.
But I do think that it was probably never at like more than half the people in the room were like, absolutely not. I mean, that's where, or I don't know, as opposed to this where, what do you like? I just don't see the additive value, especially for right now. If it's not going to help you in football today, then.
Right. That's my biggest thing. Like, and I said yesterday, like, okay, so we get to 2031. Is the Big 12 looking like it looks now, or are there teams on their way out? And
I
so
would bet a body part they won't. They won't be looking like they are now.
Right. And so, like, I mean, there's so much of this is just having to guess what looks down the line, or what down the line looks like. It's Brett Yormark here in 2031.
Yeah.
I mean, does anybody feel like super confident making that bet that he's here 7 more years as Big 12 commissioner? And this is entirely a pet project of his, right? So are you making a move to appease Brett Yormark, but doing it knowing that it is beneficial for you down the long way of another decade from now? Or, is this not the prudent move and you need to stay flexible and maybe not take this on right now? I don't know. I mean, I appreciate that he's being aggressive. I appreciate that he's thinking outside the box, because I know the old regime, with all due respect, would never have kicked the tires on probably half the ideas that they have. And I think there's been there's been some good ones. I think there's been some that have, they're like, you're like, whatever, Big 12 Mexico, like, take it or leave it. We're fine without it. But it's clearly, something he's locked in on. I think it's also worth mentioning that Dennis Dodd article. You mentioned the 6 in favor, at least 2 are against. I think you mentioned that. So like, there's 2 that are outright against.
10 of the 16
are not yes votes.
Are not yes or right now they're maybes.
They're non-yes votes.
As somebody that sells a lot, and Paul, you're doing that a lot now more than ever, getting a no is better than getting a maybe.
Yeah, don't don't waste my time.
Yeah.
The other part of it, though, is that Fox is kind of a big part in this, and they are, according to this article, are against the move. Now, that's led to, I saw this spiral into a whole different conversation about, like, the future of Fox and the Big 12's like, I have no idea, dude. And I don't think anybody talking on Twitter honestly has an idea about Fox and the Big 12's relationship in 2031. Maybe they do, because, I mean, who the heck knows with all the anonymity? It might be the Fox Sports president under Bojangles 11 or something. You know what I mean? Like, who the heck knows? But I think that gets, like, so into the weeds of like, of trying to figure out that it's not really worth, wasting too much energy on. But on the surface, if Fox is against the move, then that's obviously very interesting. Well, and there could be long-term political plays here as far as, what they cover in the future or what their relationship is like with the Big 12. And so that was a very interesting note as well about Fox.
Fox or ESPN, who carry everything,
right?
If they don't want to do it, and they're the ones that are spending the money to do it, then why give them any kind of a crease to go, okay,
you're right,
screw you guys.
But if you are partnered up with Fox and ESPN and one of them says, we want this, and the other one says, we don't, then where does that leave you as the Big 12? And that's why the Fox note is interesting, because clearly there's a tug of war, because we know ESPN wants this.
All right. When we talk about ideas that initially when they're brought up, that sometimes you're like, that doesn't make any sense, or sometimes that makes a lot of sense. Remember when the private equity deal popped up about the Big 12?
Yep.
Remember that? Everyone was like, oh, my God, that's like dirty or whatever. The Wall Street Journal reporting the NFL is poised to approve private equity ownership in franchises.
They've been talking about this for ages.
I know, but this is a little – if they do it and they have all the money in the world, then it's not – at least when some people looked at that initially, I just want to bring that up because that was also on Dennis's timeline that I saw too.